Each Epiphany, I take down the decorations and return the house to normal. But we well know this year has been anything but normal. And so instead, I was glued to the TV, like many of you were, I'm sure, trying to understand how a mostly white and male mob of Trump supporters could storm the US Capitol building. Epiphany is all about revelation. And I pray that Wednesday's riot is the needed epiphany to bring about that long sought change, not just in the US, but here in Canada, where we too need to guard against division and ongoing injustice. I say injustice as well as division because it's clear to many that what happened was not just about an election. Protesters spoke about taking back their country. It was their house. They needed to stop politicians from stealing their America. If we're unsure whose America they're referring to, we need only picture the Confederate flags waving. As one journalist noted, as US demographics continue to change, these protesters were willing to sacrifice democracy in order to maintain white supremacy. Or put poignantly by Martin Luther King III in a tweet referring to the remarks of President-elect Biden. Yesterday's insurrection was not one of the darkest days in US history. It was one of the whitest. Very true. Especially when you consider the clear difference in response by law enforcement to the mostly white, demonstrably violent Trump supporters, to the racialized and for the most part peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters last summer. Like I said, I pray that this is an epiphany moment and we can all heal a too divided world. And I really believe that we can if we start taking our cues from our gospel story, which along with the coming of the Magi and the turning of water into wine at a wedding in Cana, is considered one of three epiphanies, each revealing not just who Jesus is, but who we all are as well. So what's in the story? John is baptizing. In doing so, he was inviting people to be purified, but not just ritually. He was taking them back to the first moments of the book of Genesis, as the Spirit hovered over the waters of creation. And later, as those same waters were gathered into the seas, the place where life first emerged. Our lives too begin in the waters of our mother's wombs. And so John was inviting people back to be spiritually renewed, to be reborn. In that moment that Jesus was baptized, he experienced a profound unveiling of identity as the Spirit hovered over the waters of the River Jordan, and God claimed him as beloved child. We often think of this as the Spirit, like a dove, alighting on Jesus. But if we pay attention, it's really the Spirit entering into Jesus. And this is where Thomas Kelly's words make a connection. He reminds us that we can all access that same gifting of the Spirit. Jesus became deeply aware of the divine indwelling of the Spirit, claiming him as child, as God's beloved. And this too is our foundational identity. Each and every one of us, a daughter and son of God. The same Christ slumbering in each and every one of us. And I need to repeat those words, each and every one of us. I recently received an email promoting a film which is about Charles Moore. He was a white preacher in East Texas. He set himself on fire in protest against the anti-Black racism in his community. The film explores the connection between religion and racism, something really important for us to look at when we think about the connection between white evangelical churches and Trumpism. As I watched the trailer, though, it was one snippet that stuck with me. A white man saying that just after the Civil War, across the South, pretty much everybody believed that Blacks were less than human, even without a soul. The losing of a war doesn't change your mind, he said. Hence all the Confederate flags, I guess. His words underline the ongoing reality of white supremacy, the roots of which lie in our human tendency to separate out rather than to connect. And we hear this in Genesis, in the creation story alluded to as the Spirit appears at Jesus' baptism. God separates light from dark, day from night. As the waters are separated by the dome of the sky, effectively separating heaven and earth. But these are the only spots in the text, this is important, where God is not quoted as saying, and this was good. Because separation is not good, despite how much we do it. And I wonder if we separate one from another and so consider others less worthy of respect and care, because we don't feel our own worthiness. We don't recognize Spirit's presence within us, let alone in others. Henry Nouwen recalls this the great human temptation of self-rejection. We believe the voices that make us feel small. Or to quote Henry, as soon as someone accuses me or criticizes me, as soon as I am rejected, left alone, feel abandoned, I find myself thinking, well, that proves once again that I'm a nobody. I can't feel that for very long, and so I reverse that feeling and belittle others, marginalize others, project onto them my own lack of worth. And not just in terms of race, but in terms of gender, sexuality, identity, ability, religion, the list goes on. As I shared last week, I really wonder if this is not just a social problem, but a spiritual problem, and one that needs, therefore, a spiritual as well as a social solution. In the gospel, if we're attentive, Jesus sees heaven torn apart, as if God is undoing the separation between heaven and earth that took place in Genesis 1. The disconnection that prevents us from seeing one another as beloved as siblings, that disconnection being healed. In that moment of the tearing apart of heaven, any doubt that all of us are gifted by Spirit, that all of us are revealing of God's life and love, all of that was erased. Now, I realize that it is facile of me to suggest that all we need is to live into this truth, to come to a deep awareness that I am, you are, we all are loved, beloved children of God. The issue definitely runs deeper than that. But I think a spiritual renewal a la John the Baptist would go a very long way. This is something that I experienced at a Quaker worship service. Now, there's a percentage of Quakers who don't really have a structure to their worship service at all. They simply sit together in silence. each person drawing on the light within that Thomas Kelly writes about. We sat there for an hour. Occasionally, someone would stand up and offer a poem, a portion of the Bible, part of a song, an insight. But for the most part, we sat in silence, all of us simply equal before God. And they treated me, a stranger amongst them, as a friend, equally filled with that light within, with the Spirit. No wonder that same tradition also ascribes to non-violent protest, a firm commitment to peace and justice, as well as to that of equality. Drawing on their personal experience of God's presence, they know that all of us are blessed. All of us are beloved. That all makes for a pretty interesting epiphany. And I say this not just because the riot took place on Epiphany. As I shared earlier, the baptism of Jesus is considered one of 3 epiphanies, along with the coming of the Magi and a wedding feast in Cana. Each one invites us to ponder who we are in God. Every one of us beloved, blessed. All races and nations graced in love. All of us welcome to a feast where we are no longer strangers, but we are friends. In fact, we are family. That's the epiphany we're invited to see. The insights we're called on to live. May it be so. Amen.